In the humid and tropical places of the largest country in Central America, where wars for power were common, a family lineage of rulers arose, like almost no other that has been seen in 20th century America. During the more than 40 years that the Somoza Dynasty ruled, Nicaragua experienced a period of stability and economic development that the country had not seen in all its Republican years. Every time the ruling family rose as the undisputed masters of the nation, they became the wealthiest family in Central America and neutralized any real dissent that threatened power. The patriarch and founder of this family was none other than Anastasio Somoza Garcia, a man who knew how to weave a complex network of power and loyalties, and reconcile through persuasion or violence the heterogeneous interests of Nicaraguan society. Supported by the United States and its National Guard. Today we are going to learn about the life of one of the most controversial figures of the 20th century in America. Anastasio Somoza Garcia was born on February 1, 1896 in the region of San Marcos in Nicaragua. He was born into a wealthy family, his father being a notable senator and a prosperous landowner. His father's name was Anastasio Somoza Reyes, while his mother's name was Julia Garcia. While there isn't much biographical data about our protagonist's childhood, according to testimonies from his environment, the young Anastasio studied in the best schools of the time in Nicaragua in his youth. He is then sent by his parents to the United States, to Philadelphia, where he develops a positive view of this northern power and the desire to maintain good relations with it. Anastasio studies at the Piero Bernate School of Business Administration. After graduating, he returns home to become an entrepreneur, but he doesn't do very well in this. So, in light of his family background, he begins to take an interest in the path of politics. It is essential to note that Nicaragua, which would become the largest country in Central America, is shaping its identity and independence as a people through a long process of political struggles and social changes during the 19th century. After the Republic of Nicaragua was established, after the 50s of the 19th century, Nicaraguans witnessed the eternal disputes between liberals and conservatives, always mediated by the emerging hegemon, the United States of America, which had assumed themselves as protectors and leaders of the entire region beyond their borders. A reality from which this vast territory called Nicaragua did not escape, where the United States had gained considerable influence during the 19th centuries. The United States had as a foreign policy goal the creation and control of an interoceanic canal in Nicaragua at the beginning of the 20th century. But the president of Nicaragua, José Santos Zelaya, who had been governing since 1893, had maintained a skeptical policy with the United States and a closer approach to Europe. Zelaya refused to grant the United States the exclusivity of the interoceanic canal that was to be built. In addition to having refused to receive several important loans from the American banking system, this sovereign policy of Zelaya cost him an open backlash against him by the United States and Nicaraguan conservatives, a threat that included the presence of American warships in Nicaraguan ports, which ultimately led to Zelaya's resignation from power in 1909. Shortly after his overthrow and the installation of a pro-American conservative government, a rebellion against this government occurs in Nicaragua. In the midst of this civil war, the United States decides to intervene militarily in Nicaragua, now directly, in 1912, effectively establishing a sort of protectorate in that country where the Nicaraguans would govern, but under the direct military tutelage of the Americans. It is under this context, under the shadow of the Monroe Doctrine, and the intrigues between two parties that could not channel Nicaragua towards a common destiny, Anastasio Somoza, father, would be raised. During the following years, after the American intervention, disputes and even armed conflicts between the liberal and conservative parties continue in Nicaragua. In the same way, armed groups are formed against the American military occupation. Within these confrontations, the leadership of Augusto Sandino emerges, a Nicaraguan with nationalist, anti-imperialist, anarchist, and communist influences, who refused to accept the last pact made between the Nicaraguan political class and Washington in 1927, So he launches a guerrilla war against the invader and against the Nicaraguan government, gaining national and international fame after his victories and forming the army defender of national sovereignty. It is in this same conflict that Anastasio Somoza Garcia also has his first open foray into politics, when in the war that breaks out in 1926 between conservatives and liberals, Somoza supports the liberal side, although he does not side with the winning side. The pact that is made between conservatives, liberals, and Washington allows Somoza, once the conflict is over, to enter into the new government that is established and within its state bureaucracy. In turn, Anastasio had excellent command of spoken and written English. These elements made Anastasio become very close to the American delegates who de facto controlled the country. At the same time, he was quickly climbing up the public administration. During these times, Anastasio also married Salvadora de Baile, a Nicaraguan of French origin who had a wealthy inheritance as part of the Nicaraguan elite. Anastasio and his wife had 3 children, Lilian, Luis, and Anastasio, also known as Tachito. All 3 born in the city of León. Luis, the eldest, and Anastasio, the youngest, would eventually become presidents of the Republic, returning to the marriage in the 20s. This union made Anastasio gain much more ground within the Nicaraguan elites. In the future, Somoza was very overprotective with all his close ones, relatives, and anyone who was related by kinship to the marriage. Somoza. From dance, was he going to enjoy state favors? Anastasio was also known for his womanizing and having many lovers, although he never left Salvadorita alone, as he called her, whom he claimed to love until his deathbed. On their part, the Nicaraguan government, in alliance with the United States, continued to have the major problem of the guerrillas led by Augusto Sandino. The fighting had intensified, and Sandino was gaining prestige and ground more and more, sometimes humiliating the American troops themselves. Dozens of towns had been razed in the search for the guerrillas. Simultaneously, the United States found maintaining its military presence in that country very expensive, so it started planning its military withdrawal, not without leaving everything prepared to maintain control of the nation by other means. For these reasons, and to combat the guerrillas, the United States decides to create in 1930 the National Guard of Nicaragua, created in the image and likeness of the American doctrine, made up of Nicaraguans, but led by American officers, thus being the main armed body of the country of Nicaragua. As a sign of the good relations that Anastasio is building with the American authorities and with the leading Nicaraguan groups, by 1929, Tacho Somoza is appointed as Nicaragua's diplomat in Costa Rica. Then in 1931, he is appointed as Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs, and by 1932, he is appointed as the Assistant Director of the National Guard. Alongside this, the battles between the National Guard and Sandino's sovereign armies persisted. However, from 1932, as we mentioned, the United States gradually begins the military eviction from Nicaragua until by 1933 there were no Marines left in the country. Before the eviction, they ensured their trusted men remained in the country's key positions. And as the ultimate sign of the trust that Anastasio Somoza Garcia had earned, the young adult of 37 years was appointed as the head of the National Guard. In this way, American soldiers transferred command of 4,000 National Guard soldiers to Anastasio Somoza, who thus became the main military authority of the country. As the United States Army withdrew, they were determined to maintain their geopolitical influence in Central America. And Anastasio, also nicknamed Tacho, was one of the trusted men for the North. And not only that, he was also the political nephew of the acting president, Juan Bautista Zacasa. The American troops were withdrawn. Sandino begins peace negotiations with the Nicaraguan government, considering that his main objective had already been achieved. But these peace agreements that Sandino was initiating would lead him into a terrible trap. Along with United States Ambassador Arthur Bliss Lane in 1934, Anastasio Somoza, was it necessary that beyond the peace agreements, Augusto Sandino and his followers needed to be completely neutralized? So they begin to plan how to end his life. One of the alleged obstacles Somoza had for this was that both he and Sandino were Masons, and within Masonry it was forbidden to directly attack each other as members. By February 2nd of 1933, President Sacasa and Sandino agree on a historic peace plan that included a general amnesty for all Sandinistas. The signing ceremony of the agreement at the presidential house was surrounded by great enthusiasm. National and foreign correspondents photographed the historic reconciliation hug. Not only did President Sacasa hug Sandino, but so did the chief director of the National Guard, Anastasio Somoza, in front of the camera that was supposed to perpetuate the Judas hug. Sandino is fulfilling the agreements, handing over almost all of his weapons as agreed and discharging his people. But very soon the National Guard begins to violate what was established in the agreements, harassing the Sandinistas in various ways. Somoza's troops even killed several Sandinistas who had recently laid down their weapons and were returning to their homes. Somoza's plan continued stealthily, amid claims by Sandino for the agreement to be fulfilled. On the night of February 21, 1934, after Sandino and his companions had dined with President Juan Bautista Sacasa, a group of soldiers, led by Captain Lisandro Delgadillo and under the orders of Somoza, stopped the car where Sandino was, in front of the barracks and the Hormiguero prison. The guards put Don Gregorio Sandino, Sandino's father, and Don Sofonia Salvatierra into that pressure. Meanwhile, Sandino and his generals are led to a vacant lot on the outskirts of the city and in front of a previously excavated mass grave. Are they all shot? While this is happening, Anastasio was at a poetry recital by the Peruvian poetess Soy La Rosa Cardenas, who recites poems by the Nicaraguan Ruben Dario, parallel to the massacre. That same night, the National Guard ends the lives of nearly 300 unarmed Sandinistas who were in the municipality of Huihuili, among men, women, and children. This bloody event marks one of the turning points for the establishment of the Somoza Dynasty in the Central American country. With the Sandinista threat eliminated, Somoza turns his attention to the internal political situation. First, he reorganizes the armed forces, purging them of his adversaries and placing his allies in important positions. Then, using his position, he continues gaining supporters in the Liberal Party and Congress, readying for his ultimate rise to power. 2 years after Sandino's death, and after these internal changes, on June 9, 1936, Anastasio Somoza leads a coup against President Juan Bautista Sacasa. With the support of his American allies, Anastasio, after overthrowing Sacasa, knew it was better to win an election than to just declare himself president. So it's Dr. Carlos Brenes who assumes the presidency of the country and calls for elections at the end of that same year. Somoza runs as a candidate and campaigns with the direct support of part of the Nicaraguan elite and the United States government. The elections are held, questioned by the opposition, and Anastasio Somoza Garcia wins as the new president of Nicaragua, beginning his term on January 1, 1937. Few knew that from then on, either as direct president or through presidents who answered to him. For nearly 20 years, Anastasio Somoza would be the supreme leader of Nicaragua. Under his sole command, he would neutralize the eternal feuds between parties and train his sons to continue the family dynasty later on. For 20 more years, the Liberal Party, which in 1928 had become the Nationalist Liberal Party, would be assumed as the great political platform of the Somozas. Thus begins, in 1937, the first formal presidency of Anastasio Somoza Garcia Somoza. Would he govern as a Latin American strongman? He was the man who had ended decades of political conflict and who had become the factor through which all important decisions in Nicaragua were made. During the governments of Somoza father, the country reached levels of order and economic modernization that it had not previously experienced. Employment levels rose, and there were progressive measures regarding workers and peasants, as well as granting women the right to vote, in 1956. Important works were also built for the time: roads, avenues, parks, night centers, and buildings that lifted the spirits of the Nicaraguans. such as the Casa del Obrero in Managua, the Presidential Palace, the Monumental Tribune, the National Stadium, the Communications Palace, among other road and basic services distribution works. In the 40s, Managua, the capital of Nicaragua, was one of the most modern and prosperous cities in Central America, and it had become an important tourism center. In its governments, the cultivation of cotton for export was also promoted, as well as coffee and livestock, alongside a small light industry in various sectors. The economy, politics, and press in Nicaragua were managed under the criteria of the patriarch. Anastasio already had a significant fortune, but upon coming to power, he would behave like a true monopolist, seeking to acquire properties and businesses in the main sectors of Nicaragua, where more than 50% of the fertile lands had passed into his ownership, along with all kinds of properties such as mansions and castles. It is estimated that by the year of his death, he would have a fortune of $150 million, which his children would later multiply, becoming one of the richest families on the continent. While Somoza was ruling, he was placing his children in important positions and preparing them to be his successors. Luis Anastasio Somoza, the elder, became president of the Congress, and Anastasio Tachito, the younger, was eventually appointed head of the National Guard. Likewise, he arranged their marriages with important figures in Nicaraguan society. Far from being discreet about his relationship with the United States, Somoza sought to project to society and the world that he always had the unrestricted support of the North American power, even when sometimes this was not the case. A key milestone of this was his personal visit to the United States in 1939, shortly after assuming the presidency. Received with great fanfare by President Franklin Roosevelt, including a military parade. Beyond negotiating a loan for Nicaragua and other bilateral agreements, the trip was presented as his consolidation in power, and his return to the country was celebrated in grand style with a crowd in the streets. By the 40s, Tacho Somoza was portrayed as invincible in Nicaragua, in addition to having a significant fortune behind him and becoming the president of that country. He had all the support of the United States and was the president of the Nationalist Liberal Party. By December of 1941, Nicaragua declares war on the Axis powers, a day before the United States itself declared it. This is done in total support of the North after the Pearl Harbor attacks. Nicaragua thus became the first Latin American country to enter this great armed conflict. Tacho would take drastic positions against citizens of Japanese, German, and Italian origin, confiscating many of their properties. Under all these trends, Anastasio Somoza Garcia continues to govern Nicaragua. During the 40s to 1947, it was already necessary to renew, even if superficially, the face that occupied the presidency. So Anastasio nominates a man he trusts, Dr. Leonardo Arguello Barreto, as a candidate. Through disputed elections, Dr. Arguello wins against the candidate of the opposition coalition. However, after several political intrigues, Dr. Arguello rebels against Somoza and refuses to ratify him as the chief director of the National Guard. Arguello said in his speech that he would not be dragged down by Somoza and appoints known opponents of Somoza as ministers. But all of this would be futile, as Somoza continued to hold the real power. So Anastasio decides to overthrow the new president with a coup, besieging the presidential house and sending Arguello into exile. After the coup, another protege of Somoza is named President Dr. Benjamin Lacayo Zacasa, and Anastasio Somoza would receive the position of Minister of War. However, due to international pressures, as not even the United States government had recognized this new Somoza government, President Lacayo Zacasa, following Anastasio's guidelines, calls for the election of a National Constituent Assembly 3 months later. On its installation day, August 15, 1947, the Assembly accepts the resignation of Lacayo Zacasa and elects a President of the Republic for a period of 4 years, to the elderly Victor Manuel Roman y Reyes, who was also a blood uncle of Anastasio Somoza Garcia, being a first cousin of his father. After 3 years as the first magistrate, and with Somoza ruling from the shadows in 1950, President Victor Manuel Romani Reyes dies ill. And after a skillful political move, Somoza manages to be named by Congress once again as president of Nicaragua. However, a presidential election was also needed to legitimize a new president. So Anastasio decides to meet with the old conservative leader, Emiliano Chamorro, and build an agreement known as the Pact of Generals, signed on April 1st of 1950. This consisted, among other things, of ceding to the conservatives a third of the seats in Congress, as well as positions in the ministerial cabinet. And in exchange, Somoza would receive the support and legitimization of the conservative sector of Nicaragua. Thus, the elections are held and Somoza wins, securing the presidency for 6 more years. With the new internal situation stabilized, a new period in Nicaragua began. During this stage of Somochismo, the autocratic government system is maintained. Somoza continued to be the factor that guaranteed order and authority, while the economy and government works continued to develop. One aspect that characterized this new period of Anastasio Somoza was an interventionist foreign policy, largely aligned with American interests. During this time, Somoza tried to oust Costa Rica's president, José Figueres Ferrer. At the same time, Somoza was a key supporter in the fall of Jacobo Arbenza's government in Guatemala in the year 1954. In addition to making multiple trips as president to various countries on the continent during these years. Despite his privileged position, conspiracies and opposition to his government persisted. An example of this was the April 4th rebellion of 1950. On an Easter Sunday, when a group of former National Guard members, along with civilians, decided to ambush him on the Pan American Highway in Managua. The plans, however, failed due to the betrayal by one of the members of the conspiracy. Going back to the mid-50s, Anastasio Somoza's 6-year presidential term was about to expire. Therefore, the Nationalist Liberal Party organizes the convention, where a party would be held to choose the new candidate for the upcoming election. Although everything was already set for this candidate to be Tacho Somoza again. This party would be on Friday, September 21st, 1956. In the middle of the party at 11:20 at night, while Somoza was dancing to Damaso Perez Prado's Black Horse, alongside his wife, a young opposition poet named Rigoberto Lopez Perez, a member of the Independent Liberal Party, who had managed to sneak into the place, approaches. And with a .38 caliber revolver, he approaches the leader and fires 4 shots into his body. Somoza is injured and falls unconscious, but not before shouting at the audacious poet, "Brute! Animal!" Immediately, Rigoberto Lopez Perez would be riddled with bullets by the National Guard in the same place, dying instantly. Tacho would be seriously injured, with a deep injury to the spine, needing immediate surgery and not being able to have it done in Nicaragua. He is transferred to Gorgas Hospital in Panama, in the canal zone that was owned by the United States. The 24th of September, 1956. He undergoes surgery, but malpractice in administering the anesthesia causes him severe metabolic encephalopathy, leading to the death of the president of Nicaragua, the 29th of September, 1956, at 4 and 5 in the morning. Among the attendance of numerous followers, who even gave speeches at his funeral, and the condolences of foreign leaders. The wake and burial of the person who absolutely dominated the destinies of Nicaragua for 20 years were carried out. After his death, his eldest son Luis Somoza and then his youngest son Anastasio Tachito Somoza would occupy the presidency of Nicaragua and maintain control of the country, until it became unsustainable for them. When in 1979, Tachito was finally forced to relinquish power, putting an end to this period in Nicaragua. Thus ended the life of Patriarch Anastasio Somoza, a cunning and cold man who had no scruples in his quest for and maintenance of power. In a country where guerrilla struggles for power were normal during the 20th century, development and order hand in hand with the peace of bayonets and neutralization of dissent were also part of this stage. With its lights and shadows, is the Somoza Dynasty a sign of a sociological phenomenon that transcends them? a sign of the psychological traits of American peoples who are still in search of their identity and their political future. Thank you all very much for watching this video. I hope you liked it. And I invite you once again to subscribe to our new channel, Mysteries of History. There we will post unpublished, exclusive, and highly interesting content on various historical topics. Below in the description and in the comments, you will be able to get the link so you can start checking out what we have posted. Also, don't forget to leave your comments on this video. Give it a like, activate the bell for notifications, and follow us on our Instagram account called The New Encyclopedia. With nothing more to say, I bid you all farewell and God bless.